Hi, my name is Dr. Patricia Price. I am a licensed psychologist in private practice, and my specialty is eating disorders and, in particular, anorexia nervosa. I decided a couple weeks ago, after speaking with a colleague, Dr. Dan Van Ingen, that I wanted to start a video series educating people who are interested about the field of eating disorders. And I'm not quite sure where this will be headed. This is my first video conference session or series, but I'm excited about it, and I hope that if anyone has questions after each video that I create, that they will send those to me, and maybe that can steer the direction of the next video. I have a huge passion for treating eating disorders, and I've trained with some of the best professionals in the world over the course of the last 12 or so years. And I thought I would share some of that knowledge there, and I'd like to do one video at least on some of the myths about eating disorders and the misconceptions, particularly about anorexia, and help people to understand what messages are out there that the general population might not even recognize as very attached to the eating disorder community. Maybe turn on some light bulbs of awareness for some people and parents in particular. I thought it would be a good idea to take this first video to give you some background and understanding of myself, and hopefully build some credibility for why you should even listen to these videos. I thought part of that has to be telling my own story, and it really underlines why I'm focusing my entire career on treating eating disorders. So I will just begin with that. I grew up in Rochester, Minnesota. I was the youngest of 5 kids. I had a very normal upbringing. 2 parents. My grandma lived with us, actually. My mom was a teacher at my school. My dad was an IBMer. Pretty normal Irish Catholic family. Nothing too noteworthy as a child. I was the youngest, as I said, and just kind of lived a free and wild childhood, I guess. When I was in middle school and in 8th grade, I had a very best friend, I should say, that I had from about age 4 on, who went all through grade school and grade school with me in middle school, and went to our church. Her parents, her dad worked with my dad. Her parents were good friends with us through church. I spent many weekends at their house. Well, in February of my 8th grade year, she didn't show up for school one Thursday, and neither did her brother, and no one really thought anything of it. But by 8 o'clock that night, it came to fruition that we got a phone call, and the entire family had been axe murdered and found in their Rochester home. I should say by their entire family, both parents, my friend Diane, and her youngest brother, who was in 5th grade. He was 3 years younger than us. Major shocker to the system, major trauma, totally out of the blue. And then even worse, the next day we discovered that the murder was committed by her 10th grade brother. So he was like a brother to me. I spent many, many hours with him during my childhood and with the family. And this was in a small Catholic community and in the Catholic school system in a small town. And the way it was handled, it was 1988. There was no concept of this kind of major tragedy happening. And so no one really knew what to do. And, and, in, and instead of doing anything, everyone just kind of tried to shove it under the rug and pretend it didn't happen. Needless to say, that left a lot of kids in massive crisis. We went to school the next day. It was like everyone just kind of wanted to pretend it was back to normal, but it really wasn't, especially for those closest to the family. In the year that followed, I did my best to try to be normal. You know, I tried to make new friends. I tried to get involved in activities at school. I was the class president. I joined the tennis team. I went out of my way to kind of recreate a new identity for myself that did not include this friend. However, you know, I think I went into a deep, dark fog and depression without even recognizing it. And in the years 1988, 1989, 1990, no one really understood mental health problems, and therapy was very taboo. My family was totally unsavvy about the psychology therapy world, and really, if they saw any problems happening, kind of discounted it as something I'd snap out of. But during that time, during this depression phase, I also began not eating and losing weight. I don't know if it was conscious at the time or unconscious, but I remember being complimented on it at first by coaches, friends, other people's parents, my parents. I was never overweight. I was just a normal sized kid, average, probably smaller than average, actually. And by the end of my freshman year, I had lost a significant amount of weight. But really, again, my parents didn't believe in psychology, and it was really hard for them, I think, to understand that it was a disease. And I don't think they had identified it as anorexia at that time quite yet. Anyway, long story short, by the beginning of my sophomore year, things were starting to really, really go downhill. This was about 18 months after the murders. And I don't remember much of the beginning of my sophomore year, except that it was difficult. My parents began bringing me more and more to the doctors. It was the Mayo Clinic in town, and I did start to hear the word anorexia nervosa, or the diagnosis. So my parents began kind of just pushing me and getting mad at me. They thought it was silly that they were having to pay medical bills to treat something that seemed so easy to fix, right? You just eat, dang it, and the problem will go away. Why can't you just eat? By Christmas time of my sophomore year, I had diminished quite a bit, and I'm not sure what happened, but in my memory at least, which was really bad back then because I was so underweight, I feel like there was some pressure from Mayo that if my parents didn't do something serious to help me, then there was going to be some repercussions for them, or some legal actions taken. And at that time, they decided to put me into the cardiac unit at St. Mary's Hospital in Rochester, which is part of the Mayo system. So I spent 2 weeks at that time on the cardiac unit. This was a little after Christmas of my sophomore year. And that was a really inappropriate fit for an anorexia patient. I would escape from there. Thankfully I'm years past that, so I have no problem talking about that. But when I look back, I think, wow. And actually, I'm creating a blog that goes along with this video series. So in the blog, I'm giving much more detail about the things that I was doing during that time. But needless to say, during that 2 weeks, I lost even more weight, wouldn't eat, And then after the 2 weeks, they decided to put me into a general psychiatric unit that was locked. Um, there was no that was 1990. There were no, it was beginning of 1990. There were no eating disorder clinics in the state at that time that were specifically eating disorder focused. And so they would just put eating disorder patients in with other psychiatric patients. So I got to I spent the next 4 months of my life living in the lockdown psychiatric unit at St. Mary's Hospital with all sorts of kids with different diagnoses between about the ages of 5 and 18. Toward the end of that, I was able to check myself out at the beginning of the day, walk to high school, go to high school at my normal high school, and then walk back home and check myself back into the psych units. Home was the psych unit. And I only share that aspect of it because I have a lot of patients now who are mortified at the idea of that anyone in their school will find out about that they're even getting treatment for an eating disorder. And I think back to that time, and I didn't think anything of it, I don't think, but it had to be super weird to see me walking back to check myself into the psych unit as my friends were driving home past me and waving. So anyway, I did get up to my goal weight, which was the requirement for getting out. There was no specific eating disorder treatment provided for me. It was all about just restoring lost weight, getting to a weight, and that was going to be the magic cure. It wasn't. I got out in about the end of April and appeared to be doing pretty well. People complimented me, thought it was great. I had a few creepy, people asked me how I had done it, which was even at that time very disturbing. But I mean, how I had lost weight. They would ask me what the tricks were. But otherwise, people were mostly complimentary of me looking better and being healthy. And I proceeded to do my junior year and senior year without any therapy or intervention. It appeared, I guess, on the outside that I was doing pretty well, but I was absolutely falling apart on the inside. I developed all sorts of different eating disorder behaviors, and that's one thing that is really common, is if you have a low weight eating disorder or any type of eating disorder, but particularly low weight, it's super uncommon to go from that low weight eating disorder straight back to recovery. It's much more common to go through phases where eating is all over the map, bulimia, binge eating. At one point, I was about 20 pounds over my goal weight. I was every diagnosis of an eating disorder that you could think of, and then some, maybe. I spent my senior year, if you look at my senior photos, you can see about 4 different patties just in that one school year. And then I went away to our family school, which was Creighton University. That was where all of my other siblings went, down in Omaha for college. Down there, I had my first big relapse into anorexia. I was hyper focused on getting straight A's. I was super obsessional about my classwork. I needed to be getting 120%, not just 95%. And I slowly began losing weight again, and I relapsed hard by my sophomore year. Christmas time of my sophomore year, which was ironically the same as in high school, Christmas time of my sophomore year. But Christmas time of my sophomore year of college, things had really gotten bad. Again, there was no eating disorder treatment to be found anywhere, at least that my parents found for me. So I ended up dropping out of college at that time and moving back home with my parents. I never went back for my second half of my sophomore year. I spent that year, that semester working full time and really not getting any treatment, but at least taking a step back from life and refocusing my energies on getting better. I also transferred schools to a much closer to home school, not as academically rigorous school. And it was awesome for me. It was a great decision. It was probably one of the best decisions of my life. I really loved that school. Transferred to St. Mary's in Winona, and it was just it was just great people, and I got to kind of reform my new identity, even though it was not as prestigious of a school. When I was done with college, I had an education major. That was my undergrad degree, was education, and I wanted to teach elementary ed. I found my first teaching job, which I was so excited about, in a tiny little town up in northern Minnesota at a little teeny tiny Catholic school, and I was teaching kindergarten full time. Went up there, was living alone, had no idea who anyone in this town was. And I got really depressed again, super depressed, and slowly began losing weight again. And that was my last big relapse. So I had 2 major relapses after the initial one. But I had to quit that job about a month early before the school year was even done. It was really horrible because I had to leave my kindergartners, and of course they didn't know what was going on. And I was very, very sick again, and I had to move back to Rochester, move back to my house with my parents, and try to figure things out again. I went to a therapist who was great, but didn't really she saw a lot of eating disorder patients, but she didn't necessarily have any specific training in empirically supported treatments for eating disorders, and really there weren't any quite yet. I mean, they weren't greatly established. And so I started a job teaching nearby in Rochester, and I spent 2 years doing that, and then I started into a master's degree program simply to get paid more as a teacher, honestly. But I did it in counseling and psychology. I spent 2 years doing my master's program at night while I was also teaching during the day. And when I got done with that, I should say I was teaching 8th grade math at the time. During those, I went from kindergarten to teaching 8th grade math. When I got done with my master's degree, I was in a serious relationship that has now turned into my marriage. We've been married for 18 years now, but back then, that was about 20 years ago. My now husband said, "Are you sure you don't want to go into something besides teaching?" And that was really a gift, because I never thought about changing careers, but that was like a light bulb went off in my head, and I thought, wow. So I started to look at things that I could do with a master's degree. At that time, nothing. So I went back to get my doctoral degree in psychology, and went back for 4 more years full time. Well, so I should say from about age 28 on, I was pretty much like recovered from my eating disorder, and that's what I went into my doctoral program at age 28. And it was like, I felt like things were just falling into place finally. I thought, wow, I have all of this experience with dealing with my own eating disorder. Why don't I start? I had heard that there were these new therapies and new treatments that were showing great signs of, I thought they were too good to be true at first, and I barely believed that it could be the case that there was a treatment that could help with anorexia specifically. But I decided to spend the next 4 years of my doctoral program really looking into this and trying to become an expert in it, and maybe combining some education and experience to help others who were going through the same thing I had been through. And it's been an amazing journey. Since about the late 90s, there have been some really great treatments found, and I've gotten to train with the founders of those treatments, and it's just been it's just been, I have to say it's so interesting to see how things were for me back in the late 80s, early 90s compared to how things are today. And that's part of what I want to talk about in this video series. But one thing I can say, when I first was hospitalized, they really back then blamed parents for anorexia. They thought, the parents were too rigid and the kids were trying to be control the only thing that they had control over, which was food. And so they didn't allow me to see my parents for the first 2 weeks for sure. And then my parents had to get passes to come see me at the hospital. And it was kind of like based on how well I was doing. If I was doing well, they could come see me. If I wasn't, they were restricted from seeing me. Today, there's a therapy called family-based therapy, which is the gold standard therapy for adolescent eating disorders, and in particular, anorexia nervosa. Family-based therapy completely puts the trust in parents to do things on their own at home that one time the treatment staff would have had to do it in hospital. That's just one major shift, major shift. And I can explain that more in future series and how all these things came about, or in future videos. And I'm so excited. I get so excited to share all this stuff because it's so awesome that there's help for patients now that didn't used to exist. So I've decided to really dedicate my career life to using what I know from my own experience. And, eating disorders are literally pretty difficult to understand unless you've been through them, especially anorexia. There's so many misconceptions about it. And it's just a very, very tricky illness to get inside the head of, unless you've been there. And I really value my experience now. Do I wish it hadn't happened? Yes. But am I happy that I can use my experience to help others? Yes, I am. There's also, the FBT is really the gold standard for adolescents and those living at home. It can also be used in adults who have a support person around, but there are other treatments such as cognitive behavioral therapy enhanced by Christopher Fairburn, which is the gold standard really right now for adult eating disorders, particularly for binge eating disorder and bulimia. And I just figured that I'd share my story first to kind of give myself some credibility, let you know that I've really worked hard in getting as much education as I can about the empirically supported treatments. There are some great hospitals around the country now that specifically work with eating disorder patients. There are 2 or 3 now in the state of Minnesota. Unfortunately, they're all in Minneapolis. So, but it's growing. The point is it's growing. The understanding of eating disorders is growing, and that's a good thing. The bad thing is that the culture in which eating disorders are fostered seems to be also growing. And I can spend some time talking about that again in a different video. But I will leave it here today. If you watch this video and you have any specific questions for me, could you please send me an email? My email address is Patti, Patti, at drdpatriciaprice.com. I would love to be able to tailor these videos to specific needs and requests. Thanks. See you next time.